everybody for joining. I'm Alice Roberts. I'm the head of campaigns at CPRE London. We're the London branch of the national charity CPRE. And we're here today to talk about a subject which is very close to CPRE's heart, which is the protection of London's green belt. As many of you may know, the London Mayor has been very protective of London's green belt in his first 2 terms, but at the beginning of his 3rd term, he has recently announced that there will be a pan-London Greenbelt review, which is something which is, of course, a big concern for us, particularly given that we believe that there is enough brownfield land within London to accommodate London's housing and development needs. So we today wrote to the Deputy Mayor Jules Pipe, expressing our concern about the upcoming Greenbelt review and to ask questions about the rationale for the review and to stress the importance of maintaining strong Greenbelt protection. At the same time, we've been working with campaigners in Enfield for a long time now, where the local authority, Enfield Council, is allocating or is seeking to allocate Greenbelt land for housing. And obviously that is a very big concern to all of us. And so sorry. So our webinar today, we're going to hear from Andrew Lack, who is from the Enfield Society, and Carol Fisk from Enfield Road Watch, who have pioneered an incredible campaign in Enfield and mobilised a very large number of people to demonstrate the depth of opposition to the use of Greenbelt for housing in Enfield and the desire to see Enfield Greenbelt protected. So we're really delighted to have them with us today. We have published our letter to Jules Pipe online, and in about 5 or 10 minutes, when everybody's in the room, my colleague John will put the link to that page on the website, in the chat, so that you can have a look at the letter that we've written. And also we are asking people to write in support, so to write in your own words about your own local area, and to really write in support of our letter as well. So thanks to everybody for joining, and I just wanted to make one more short announcement before we get started, which is that there is a meeting of the London Greenbelt Council this evening, I believe, and that Richard here is in the room. We'll ask him to say a couple of words a bit later, but we're also going to put the details of that meeting in the chat if you would like to join that meeting this evening. So without further ado, I'm going to go to our speakers today who are doing one presentation between them, and they're going to share that presentation, but I think they're starting with Andrew. John, if you could share the screen, and Andrew, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alice. So I'm Andrew Lack. I'm a trustee with the Enfield Society. I've been a trustee with the Society since 2018. My role normally is IT administration, not local plans, and somehow I've got wrapped up in this. And so unfortunately, our other expert, John West, is not available today. So I've agreed to make this contribution. So next slide, please. I'm not sure if it's John. Are you doing the slides, John? If we could have the next one up, please. Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much. So by way of an introduction to the Green Belt in Enfield, this slide shows the extent of it. To understand the importance of the Green Belt in Enfield, it's necessary to know a little bit about the history. The Green Belt is really the remains of the extensive Enfield Chase Royal Hunting Ground, and it dates all the way back to the Norman Conquest. but it became more important in the Middle Ages with the Stuarts and the Elizabethans and the Tudors as a royal hunting area. The term chase is actually a legal term, and its definition goes all the way back to the Middle Ages. In 1217, there was the Charter of the Forest, which established certain rights to commoners on the otherwise inaccessible royal hunting areas to graze their animals. And as you can see from the map, that it's actually a very wide area. It's all the way across from the west, Monk and Hadley, to the east, Enfield Town. If you know Enfield Town, there's a road called Chase Side, which starts at the War Memorial. That was literally the eastern edge of the Royal Chase. And of course, in the north, it goes up into Potter's Bar. And at the south, we have South Gate, which of course you all know about, and that was a gateway onto the Chase. That's where it gets its name from. In 1777, the Chase was enclosed and the commoners were turfed off and were no longer allowed to graze their animals. And the Chase was divided into 3 walks, and they were administered by 3 lodges. And you'll know those names because the West Lodge is roughly in the area where today there is a hotel of that name. The East Lodge, there's today a road named after it. And of course, South Lodge was largely developed in the 30s around Oakwood and has now become known as the South Lodge Estate. More recently, though, in 1994, when Enfield Council was creating its then unitary development plan, which is a forerunner of today's local plan, with consultation with the Countryside Commission, English Nature, English Heritage, and the London Ecology Unit, the borough decided to create the area of special character, the Enfield Chase area of special character. And you can see that in black around the Chase, which is part of Enfield now. There's a section at Cruise Hill, which is excluded from that area of special character. May we have the next slide, please? So this is a view of part of the Chase. This is an area which is known as Vicarage Farm. Some of you may know this. This is the Merry Hills Way, and it's looking it's looking east towards Enfield, and you can just see a few houses in the trees in the background. But otherwise, this is a very rural view, and it's the rural nature of Enfield Chase which gives rise to an important characteristic of the borough, in much in the same way as Richmond Park does to Richmond and Hampstead Heath does to Hampstead. The Merry Hills Way is also very interesting because the Enfield Society was instrumental in having it designated as a right-of-way. It took a long time to do, but eventually in 2018 it became a formal right-of-way. And this site where this photograph is taken is where 3,755 homes are currently proposed, known as Chase Park. May we have the next slide, please? So today, Enfield Chase, or the Green Belt part of Enfield Chase anyway, it represents about 37% of the borough. So it's a sizable chunk of the London Borough of Enfield. The ownership of large parts of the Chase was actually acquired in the 30s by a very far-reaching, far-sighted Middlesex County Council that purchased large tracts of land. And these passed to the London Borough of Enfield in 1965 when the Middlesex County Council was abolished and the London Borough of Enfield was created. One of the points that we've made publicly and at the hearing, although technically it's not a matter for the inspection of the local plan, is that the council stand to make a great deal of money from the sale of the green belt that they own for housing. And we suspect that this is one of the motives behind the current plans that the council has introduced. The council currently has at least 800 million of debt, and this could go some way towards him writing that off. The Greenbelt today, as you probably know, it's largely made of farmland, which is tenanted. It has an extensive network of footpaths and rights of way across the chase, so it's very accessible. And a lot of those have been created over the last 50 years by work with of the Enfield Society itself. You will be familiar that within the Greenbelt, within the current Greenbelt, there's Trent Park, there is 40 Hall, and there's Whitewebs Park. And of course, Whitewebs has recently gained some quite notable media attention because of the council's plan for the Spurs Women's Football Academy. And if you don't know the area very well, you probably do know Cruise Hill because of the large number of garden centres there, which attract visitors from a very wide area of Hertfordshire and London. Next slide, please. So this is a map that the Enfield Society created as part of the publicity that we created for the consultations over the local plan. It shows the boundary of the chase, the 1777 boundary. And in red there, you can see are the areas of Greenbelt, which the current local plan proposes for development. And I'll very quickly go round those, starting at the top left, Holly Hill Farm. That's on the junction of the M25, junction 24, where the Ridgeway joins the M25. That is going to be a logistics park, 30,000 square meters of logistics. Moving down on the left to the bottom, we have an area at Hadley Wood, where 160 homes are proposed in the Greenbelt. And very interestingly, just 1 month before the publication of the final local plan, the Hadley Wood neighbourhood local plan was approved by the council, and the neighbourhood plan actually specifically has some protection for the Greenbelt within the Hadley Wood neighbourhood area. Moving across at the bottom, we have Vicarage Farm, which is going to be called Chase Park, where that photograph was earlier. Above it, of course, Cruise Hill, large area of Cruise Hill, including the golf course, which has been earmarked for development. Just to the right of Cruise Hill, that area is called Sloman's Farm, and that's earmarked for a burial site. And then on the extreme right of the picture, we have Rammy Marsh, where 70,000 square meters of logistics space is proposed. Next slide, please. So a little bit of background about what a local plan is. The first thing to say is that all local authorities have to have them. And they're technically called local development plans. And the clue there is in the name development. So essentially, what the local development plan is to do is it has to plan for the population growth within the area over typically a 15-year period. And it does that by looking at the need for land for housing, for employment, and then it looks at where that development can take place. The plan then goes into a series of detailed policies, which sets out exactly how the development will take place over the period. And the policies can cover the density of housing, the transport need, heritage considerations, and even building height. And these policies are very important because once the plan has been approved and accepted, those policies are then used to judge future planning applications that come forward. And it could very well be that there'll be people working in a local authority in the planning department in many years' time who have had nothing to do with the creation of the local plan, and they're expected to judge planning applications based on what the plan says. So the plan must be clear and unequivocal so that the judgments of future planning departments will follow what the intention was when the plan was created. The plan is set up in stages. They can take a very long time. Enfield's plan started in 2016. And the plan is governed by a set of regulations, which gives rise to some of the terminology that you'll hear this afternoon. Once the plan has gone through all the stages of consultation, it is then passed to an inspector appointed by the Secretary of State, who calls what's called an examination. And the examination has a number of hearings in public at which people can present arguments in favour of the plan or against the plan, and at which the council will be asked to justify what they have proposed. Next slide, please.
And this one will be mine.
That's right.
So this is Carol now speaking. I'm from Enfield Road Watch, which is a campaign group originally set up to try and protect one area of Greenbelt, but we've sort of grown over time, and we're now trying to protect all of Enfield's Greenbelt. I'm going to talk a little bit about the timeline, because we've been at this a really long time. The whole process started in late 2015 with the first consultation in 2016, at which, as you can see, 82% of respondents were against building on the Greenbelt. They gave us a number of options as to how we thought the borough should grow, and the majority was steadfastly against it, but they ignored us. A second issues and options consultation was held in 2018, at which time they thought that the plan would be adopted by 2021. The council announced then a Greenbelt boundary review, which was worrying, but the main threat still seemed to be building on Cruise Hill. And the consultation questions were quite vague about what they planned to do. It was at this point that we produced Space to Build in collaboration with the Enfield Society and CPRE London, which has, I think, become a model to show how much brownfield capacity there is in a local authority. And we found brownfield capacity for up to 37,000 homes. So there is plenty of brownfield in Enfield. In 2021, a more detailed draft plan was released for the Regulation 18 consultation. And we were surprised by the sudden inclusion of Vicarage Farm, which Andrew has talked about. That's 140 hectares. And it's really beautiful rolling landscape, the historic Enfield Chase. This particular site was promoted by email to each councillor by the landowner, which is Coma Homes, only 3 weeks before the council vote on the Regulation 18 draft plan. Coma argued that it was a more suitable area for development than Cruise Hill. But needless to say, both sites ended up in the plan. Nothing if not greedy. Next slide, please. At this point, a random sampling, no, back please. There's 2 slides that use the same graphic with different text on them. No, backwards. You need to go back to slide 8, please.
Getting a sneak preview here.
Sneak preview there. So at this, no, go back to slide 8. Slide 8, no, you're going, no, 8 we want. You're going backwards, so we want slide 8, please. Right, that one. So a random sample of responses were done to Regulation 18, and that showed that 98% of people were against building on the Greenbelt. So there's a huge wave of opposition to this idea in Enfield, but the council just ploughs on regardless. In 2021, the housing target was 25,000 homes, with approximately 7,000 on the Greenbelt, mostly at Vicarage Farm and Cruise Hill. And then 2023 to 24 saw the most recent consultation, Regulation 19, with a new housing target of 32,800, but still with 7,000 on the Greenbelt, which leads us all to believe that they suddenly found a lot more brownfield. So next slide, please. So one of the main issues in Enfield is that it's a very divided borough, and I think it's not the only one that has this issue. The east is mostly made up of what used to be Edmonton. It's more densely populated, more deprived, and it contains most of the brownfield because it was where the industry used to be. It's also represented by the majority Labour Party. The west, which was formerly Enfield and Southgate, is more affluent and contains most of the Greenbelt, and it's mostly Conservative leaning. So nearly all the Greenbelt allocations are in wards represented by the opposition Conservative councillors. And this really oversimplifies the east-west divide because there was no collaboration in creating the local plan. The Conservative opposition group were not even involved in site selection for the local plan. And unusually, the opposition filed representations at Regulation 19 and attended the hearings objecting to the local plan. So that's quite unusual for opposition politicians to get involved in that way. Now I'm handing back to Andrew for slide 10, please.
Thank you, Carol. So the Regulation 19, as it's called, is the final public consultation that takes place with the local plan. It has to be at least 6 weeks long. And in the case of Enfield's plan, it was actually a bit longer than that, but it included the Easter holiday. So it ran from the end of March last year to the 20th of May. When the Regulation 19 occurs, people that respond at that stage they're called representors, and they make what are called representations, which is a technical term. They are comments, but they're called representations. And the important point about representations is that they have to be logged in full by the council, and they have to be made in full to the inspector before the hearings begin into the examination of the local plan. The way you make a representation is actually a little bit complicated, and it is a barrier, no doubt, for people to contribute to the process. The first problem is that you have to use a particular form. It's an example of part of it there on the screen. The form is actually two parts. Part A, which you put in your name and address and your contact details, and then part B, you have to provide the comments on a particular policy or a paragraph within the plan, and you have to explain what you like or don't like about it. And you can append, theoretically, multiple part Bs to a single part A, and then email them to the council. Unfortunately, the Enfield form was very cunningly designed so that it was pretty much impossible to create multiple part Bs to go with a part A. When you make your objections in your representation, you must use planning arguments. You can't just say, I like this piece of land, I don't want it built on, I enjoy the open countryside. You have to say why it isn't sound, why technically it is not permitted. And this is another big barrier to people participating at this stage. And typically at Regulation 19, there are about 10% of the numbers of people who contributed at Regulation 18, where these restrictions don't apply. Regulation 18 had about 7,000 respondents. When you make your representation, you can say, I wish to partake in the examination. You can tick a box to say, I'd like to take part. And that is your right under the legislation. And also in London, there is usually a box on the form that says, do you consider the Enfield plan or the whatever local plan it is to be in general conformity with the London plan? Interestingly, Enfield's form didn't have that question. And finally, you can submit your representations in any way you like. Although the council would like you to use their form and you to send it by email, you could have filled the form out, printed it on a printer at home and posted it through their letterbox, or you could have sent it by post, but it has to have the right format. It can't just be a free format list of points that you want to make. Next slide, please, which is you, Carol.
Yes. So the inspector will decide if a plan has been prepared in accordance with the duty to cooperate, certain legal and procedural requirements, and whether it is sound. You can see us all here in the hearing room. Down the left are the local groups, and on the right are the council's consultants and the developers, with our lovely inspector at the end. He was really very good-natured and a good person. So to be found sound, again, these are technical terms, but we were very lucky to have some expert advice so that we could follow all of this. But it has to be positively prepared. Is it going to make a genuine effort to meet objectively obsessed needs in a sustainable way? And sustainability is very important. Is it effective? Is it likely to meet development needs? Is it justified? Does all the evidence concur with what the conclusions have been, having considered sensible alternative strategies? And there's this nasty word proportionate, which the council kept liking, or their KC kept liking to bring up. He thought everything was proportionate. We disagreed in many, many cases. And is it consistent with the National Planning Policy Framework and in London, the London Plan? So if you're challenging a local plan, it has to be challenged on these technical issues, and then the objections are discussed at the examination hearing sessions. And next slide, please, slide 12. So local interest groups, of which there are many in Enfield, collaborated throughout the local plan process. We had joint meetings, we shared email lists, we attended events together, helped each other out in whatever ways we could. The Enfield Society and Enfield Road Watch were particularly active at each stage. And leading up to Regulation 19, this was a somewhat unusual move. Several of the local groups collaborated on a petition. We were very worried that the council was going to produce, as they did, thousands of pages and expect people to digest them and respond to them in the 6-week minimum consultation. So in Enfield, if you can get 1% of the population to sign a petition, that gives you the right to speak before the council. So under the umbrella of Action for Enfield's Future, we asked the council to allow sufficient time for people, including the councillors, to read the many thousands of pages in advance of Regulation 19 consultation, and for there to be a council debate and a public vote before moving on to the consultation. Over 4,000 people signed the petition, so we were allowed to speak to the council, and they agreed to all of our requirements. So as a result, the draft local plan was pre-published for 12 weeks before the official consultation period. This was important because it gave our planning advisor the time he needed to formulate these very technical arguments that we've been talking about. And then we go back to Andrew for slide 13, please.
Thank you, Carol. Yeah, it's interesting to note that, yes, the council did publish the local plan 12 weeks before Regulation 19 began, but then about 2 weeks before the vote, published over 7,000 pages of supporting evidence, which had not been seen before, including a crucial document, which was the exceptional circumstances for building on the Green Belt, which we'd actually asked for under FOI before that and been refused. So this is a bit about the campaign that we ran. We only had about 7 weeks, but we knew that it was going to be starting. We could see where we were going on this. And so we had about 25,000 leaflets printed, a large number of posters and banners. We had some very helpful shops in the Oakwood and Enfield town area. We had helpful residents that put up banners for us in public spaces where lots of traffic would drive past. And we hand delivered about 16,000 leaflets to homes in and around the Enfield, Chase, sort of Western Enfield area, Oakwood and Cockfosters area, to try and get the message publicly out to the members of the public. We obviously used social media and email to mobilise membership. In contrast, the council organised, I think it was 3 or 4 what they called drop-in sessions at local libraries. They were staffed by members of the planning department who really didn't understand the full details of the plan, although that's probably, it wouldn't be fair for them to understand every point about it, but they certainly weren't as well briefed as they perhaps should have been. More interestingly, though, the council published a little booklet which it distributed to 130,000 homes in Enfield, explaining the virtues of the Enfield local plan, which curiously didn't mention any of the building on the Greenbelt sites. This was challenged at one of the hearings early on last month, and the council amazingly said that there had been glitches in the documentation that had been produced. Next slide, please. So, as I've already indicated, it's quite difficult for the general public to make Regulation 19 submissions. And so what we decided to do was to create a web form which, as it says on the slide there, tried to simplify the submission process. And it did that by offering a choice of policies, the more egregious ones that we were campaigning specifically on around the greenbelt and tall buildings. And then once a person had chosen to comment on one of these policies, we gave them a list of planning arguments that they might wish to make. And we pre-filled a number of other fields in the form which would otherwise have been confusing. We said, for example, that the plan was unsound, and we gave them the opportunity to say whether they wanted to attend the hearings or not. And then, having entered all this information, and you could enter multiple comments to a single set of personal details, the form formatted emails in the background and submitted them to the council on behalf of that user. And the numbers on the slide there on the left show the eventual numbers of people that used the form. So we had over 8,000 representations submitted from 3,400 people. And we've done some analysis on that and found that around about 50% of our members took part in that as well. So on the opposite side, 50% of non-members. So we were reaching non-members quite effectively. The list underneath that is the top 10 of the policies that were commented on. I won't go through the whole list, but PL10 is Vicarage Farm, Chase Park. PL11 is Cruise Hill. They obviously came out top too. SA 10.1 is a part of Vicarage Farm, which includes the equestrian centre. And we were particularly interested in highlighting this because, again, it was not clear that the council were planning to close the equestrian centre and build all over it. And so we wanted to highlight that in particular. DE6 Area 2, which is the fourth one in the list, they are tall buildings in Enfield town. And obviously we're not discussing that today, but that was another issue that we were heavily campaigning over. May I have the next slide, please? So in conclusion, it looks, great. We got a lot of people to contribute to Regulation 19. In fact, there's about 50% of the Regulation 19 representations came from the Enfield Society's form. So that sounds like a win, but actually it's only a part of it, because the real issue at making an effective response to a local plan is having detailed planning arguments to unpick the huge amounts of information which is published by the council. And in this regard, we've been very, very lucky in having professional advice given to us by people that know, what local plans are and how to respond to them. And also, it has to be said, we have spent a lot of money on this, £30,000 at the moment. And we have had 4 consultants engaged who produced detailed reports, the sort of thing that the council should have been doing, but have not done so, or have not done in the way that we feel is appropriate for such an important and controversial set of proposals. So the 4 plans are, we've had a heritage and historic landscapes appraisal carried out for Enfield Chase. We've had a heritage impact assessment carried out for Cruise Hill. We've had a report carried out looking at local views. Local views are where the local plan actually does have a set of views which it claims are protected, but our analysis shows that some of these protected views will have buildings intrude into them from Cruise Hill in particular. And the slide there shows the sort of information that we've had back from our consultants. At the bottom there's a illustration of what you would see if you drove or walked along Hadley Road in northwest Enfield. Next slide, please, which I believe is you, Carol.
It is, yes. So going back to how we challenged the local plan, with the expert help that Andrew was talking about, which got spread over a number of the local interest groups, we were able to cover a lot of arguments, and all the highlighted ones you see there are the representations from local interest groups. The inspector had set a limit of 3,000 words per hearing statement, so it was good that we had so many people who could put in different arguments, and sometimes reinforcing arguments that needed to be said by more than one group. The hearing statements all responded to specific questions that the planning inspector had asked the council. So the council was also answering these questions at the same time, and we were carefully listening to what their KC was saying to see if we could jump in with the points that we knew we needed to make. And we think we were pretty successful at that. As you can see, oh, sorry, can you go back to that one? I haven't finished yet. 16 we're at the moment. Thank you. As you'll see in the photo, the local interest groups on the left, we've sort of, are as many of us, if not more, than there are for the people sitting at the table on the opposite side. And the programme officer had said that the inspector was very impressed by our hearing statements, by what we brought up at the hearing sessions, and you know, I think we had an impact there. The GLA and TfL also attended, and their contributions were a bit more confusing, so we're going to talk about those in more detail in a second. Could I have the next slide, please? Next slide, thank you. So the inspector noted numerous issues in the local plan, which could impact on whether the plan is, no, we're going back. Next, the one before that, 17, please. Thank you. And the inspector was, was rather unhappy with the council in quite a lot of ways, and one of them being that they had produced so much paper, because he has to read all of that and understand it and then come up with his questions. Apparently he asked them one question, which was a yes/no answer, and they came up with a 60-page document, which did not make him happy. He did have concerns about the Greenbelt release, because this particular plan, because of the timing, is still being examined under the 2023 NPPF and the current London plan. And the council is trying to justify the release by using a capacity housing target. So they're looking at everywhere they could possibly build houses, including the Greenbelt, and saying that that's our housing target. It considerably exceeds the London plan target. And the GLA said that that was not the way it should be done. They're also claiming that they have included all available brownfield sites, and this is being challenged with good evidence, including our Space to Build Enfield report. The top photo there is Meridian Water, which is, I think, still the largest brownfield site in London. It's supposed to eventually have 10,000 homes, but it's been going on for over 10 years now, with only 300 or so already built, but it does have capacity there. Capacity for many of the brownfield site allocations has been, it seems, deliberately reduced in order to justify building on the Greenbelt. For instance, IKEA, who own a Meridian Water site where they used to have a store and it's now being promoted for housing, in their hearing statement, they said the allocation of the land is framed in a manner that artificially and mechanistically suppresses the site's true capacity. So we weren't alone in thinking that. And then the other big issue with the Greenbelt placemaking sites is their viability. The inspector was, has questioned the viability evidence, is asking to see more of that. Because of their topography, which is rolling hills, and their distance from public transport, they are not really sustainable locations. the council would have us all riding e-scooters and e-bikes up and down these wonderful new footpaths, but that's not going to happen. So they're going to be car dependent, and because of viability, the affordable housing targets are very unlikely to be met. Next slide, please.
Carol, can I just say, if we're able to finish in the next few minutes, just so we have time for some questions, how many slides do we have left?
3. Yeah, mine is short. Andrew can be concise. And I'm not seeing myself when I speak, so I don't know if other people are seeing me or if they're just seeing Andrew all the time, but regardless.
Yes, we can see you, Carol. It's all
You
good.
can, okay. All right, so the other issues that were challenged, legal and procedural. I mean, Andrew has already addressed the public engagement issue. The fact that the plan was submitted in early August, but by late January, when the hearing started, there were still omissions from the representation database and errors in the consultation statement, which summarizes the comments that people have made. This is a continuing issue, and the council is supposedly reinstalling everything, or having an outside company do that, and they have a deadline of March 31st to get all of those representations back up. And then the duty to cooperate was a big issue because the council didn't have an evidence trail for how they've talked to the neighbouring authorities, which you can see in the little plan there, about housing and gypsy and traveller sites. Next slide, please.
I think that's me, isn't it?
No, this is me.
Oh, is it? I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, it is. Yes, sorry.
Yeah. So TfL and GLA both consider that the Greenbelt release makes the draft plan unsound based on current London plan policies. But in their hearing statement acknowledging the new NPPF and higher housing targets, TfL suggested releasing even more of Enfield's Greenbelt for even higher density development because it is close to 2 tube stations. And you can see in brown or yellow on the map there, the area that TfL is saying could be developed. It would be much higher density. At the moment, they're talking about 4,000 homes on Vicarage Farm. This would be 12,000 homes. So it would completely change the suburban character of the area. And one of the rationales for choosing this particular area is because it's near 2 tube stations. So does that mean that any park in London that's near a tube station will be fair game for building? How about the Royal Parks? Next one, please, and back over to Andrew.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. Right, well, I'll canter through these a bit more quickly if we want to get onto the questions. So the GLA statement, which is available on the council's website, and I would advise anyone who's particularly interested in this to go and have a look at it. It was read out at the hearing. The GLA were not originally intending to come to the examination, and we understand the inspector asked them to attend, particularly as they'd put in quite a critical hearing statement. So they read out a pre-prepared statement, which is normally verboten at examinations, and that has been transcribed and is now in the public domain. But essentially, as Carol has said, the GLA's position is that the current proposals under the 2023 NPPF, that is the old one, are not sound, and Vicarage Farm and Cruise Hill is not sound. But the GLA can see that the ground has shifted since May 2024 with the election of the new Labour government, and they now say that there is a material consideration to be had about the new NPPF and the new housing target that has been proposed for London, which is considerably higher than the present one. And as a result of that, the GLA concluded their statement that was read out with 3 options that they suggested the inspector might like to consider. The first was to delay the whole plan while the proposals for the increased housing density on the Greenbelt were worked up into a full plan. The second option was to create what's called an area action plan, so that could run alongside the Enfield local plan moving to completion, but without actually removing any Greenbelt at this stage. And the third option was simply to say, well, Vicarage Farm and Cruise Hill should be removed from the Enfield plan and considered at a later stage. The inspector has said a number of times that the current Enfield local plan is being inspected under the 2023 NPPF. So, and I think the inspector was fairly adamant that he wasn't going to go through all those options that the GLA were indicating. So it looks like the GLA are still saying in a roundabout sort of way that they don't consider the current plan sound, but there needs to be a further examination of Greenbelt in London. The final slide, if we may have it, please. I will be quick about it. So at the end of the whole process, we had 6 days of inspection, of examination and hearings in January. And on the 14th of February, Valentine's Day, the inspector delivered his letter after that first stage. Now, unfortunately, there is going to be an enforced delay to the Enfield plan because the inspector, Stephen Lee, is involved in the Bristol local plan. So we don't expect any further developments in Enfield, certainly in the hearings anyway, until May or possibly June. But in the meantime, he's issued a letter to the council which sets out quite a large number of things that he wants to see happen before the hearings resume. The representations, we mentioned that, they have to be fixed by the end of March. That the current housing need was assessed in 2020, and whilst the inspector doesn't want a whole new housing need assessment carried out, he does want some form of what's called a sense check carried out. The viability, Carol has mentioned the viability. The council have said more than once during the hearing that there's extra information available on the viability of Cruise Hill and Vicarage Farm. He wants to see that. A number of new sites came forward at Regulation 19, which the council say have assessed and have rejected. The inspector wants to see their homework on that. And finally, he made three very interesting comments about, three Greenbelt sites he made comments about, not Cruise Hill or Vicarage Farm. One of the Greenbelt sites that he included in his comments was Whitewebs. And the wording of his letter seems to suggest that at present he finds the council's plan to not be effective. I beg your pardon, I get the right term, not effective in what it says. So we're not quite sure what that means for those sites, but no doubt the Whitewebs groups will be looking very carefully at the implications of that. And that concludes our presentation.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Andrew and Carol. And I noticed that there was that Mark, you'd said, please don't rush the speakers because it's very important. And so I hope I haven't rushed you through anything too much and that you managed to say everything you wanted to say.
Yeah, I think we did. Yeah, thank you very much.
I just want to say thank you, because we know that you work in a voluntary capacity, and to everybody else who's been involved in this webinar, and indeed the work in Enfield in a voluntary capacity to achieve what you've been achieving. I just think it's fascinating that that while the government is talking about grey belt, you're there defending a historic landscape which is really very beautiful, and that this the whole thinking around greenbelt not being green is really just yet another way for developers to somehow persuade the public that greenbelt is a bad idea. I'm also, just frankly staggered that that anybody can be considering releasing greenbelt in Enfield when the whole Meridian water debacle is still facing us 10 years on.
Yeah,
with
absolutely.
a 10,000 dwelling development, which has barely got started. Another thing I wanted to just talk about was that the extreme confusion that the constant changes to the NPPF are making, and the constant changes to housing targets and housing delivery and everything, is probably part of why Enfield, doesn't have a local plan in place, an up-to-date local plan in place. Probably why, part of the reason why it's hard for development to get moving, because so much time and effort is spent arguing about greenbelt and sites and policies, rather than making life easier for developers, frankly, to build the homes on the sites where we know are ready to be built on. So I think that's just a kind of general point about why you know, the national approach is not actually necessarily helpful in terms of getting homes built, and developers, you know, will often tell you that as well. And just really to kind of emphasize the point that you made about the you know, the lack of ability, the way in which it was being very hard for local people to get involved, and the amount of work that you've had to do to bring the public voice to the inquiry in a very technical milieu. So yeah, those are just some thoughts from me, but I know that there are some questions, and that Richard Knox-Johnson just wanted to say something first, and then we'll come on to Caroline. And if anyone else can put their hand up, that would be great, and we can take questions. Otherwise, John, you can maybe field a couple of questions from the chat. So yeah, we go to Richard first. Hi, Richard.
Yes,
You
I'm
introduce yourself.
very sorry. You blocked me putting my picture out, but I am here. Just to say, as the chair of the London Greenbelt Council, I did go to this inquiry on the day that the Greenbelt was discussed. Can I say, first of all, that I think the two organisations who've reported back today have done an absolutely fantastic job. They've been working hard at it over many years. And I have to say, too, I have never known a local council like Enfield disregard the public as they appear to do. And you know, this is democracy, and people should be allowed to say things at these and be afforded the time to do so. They've deliberately made it extremely difficult, which means that the two representatives of the London Greenbelt Council at that inquiry have had to do considerable work and read papers, and late on too. No consideration for that. I hope the inspector makes a comment on that. He has mentioned it, so I hope he makes a comment on it, because I think that sort of thing happening at a examination in public really isn't acceptable. Can I just say too that in 2019, when the London plan was examined, I was also a witness there. And I brought out Edmington as a result of an exercise which CPRE London and the two organisations did, looking at the brownfield in Enfield. And at that stage, Enfield Council said they had enough brownfield land for 2,790. And I remember quoting that number at that inquiry. You'll notice now that actually the figure they're putting forward, although it wasn't mentioned there, is about 28,000 in brownfield land, which shows you the amazing lack of research that's gone in there. Our two organisations and CPRE London still believe there's enough for 37,000 homes. And I believe, you know, that probably that figure is realistic. What I do believe as a result of this is that the amount of brownfield land which is being set aside for homes in the country is way underestimated, and could be as much as 3 million in the country, which would more than cater for most of our housing problems. What I would say too, just in passing, is out of interest, and it's something we'll be discussing tonight at our meeting, there's been an appeal decision on the 24th of February, 3 days ago, in Beaconsfield in the Greenbelt, where the inspectors turned it down because the land wasn't Greybelt. And it sounds very interesting if this is going to be a reason in future for actually dismissing appeals. Thank you very much, Alice. John, I'll come back, if I may, just on a couple of things on the meeting tonight near the end. Thank you.
Alice, we've got a question here from the chat.
Sorry, I'm talking away without having my mic on. I'm just going to say, I'm just going to post the meeting again now for anybody who wasn't in the meeting. That's the London Greenbelt Council meeting this evening. Richard, I'm not sure we're going to have lots of time left, but we're coming up to 1:30. We'll stay here till 1:45.
Can I just say then very quickly, we've also got Katrina Riddell on this evening talking about spatial planning and the way that that's moving forward. And that may be of interest to a lot of people, because that's the way obviously the government is going. Thank you. Okay, great. And thanks so much for your contribution. As I said, the link is in the
chat, or just get in touch with us. So we're going to move on to Caroline and then Tamara. Caroline.
Thanks, Alice. I just want to say that I'm completely blown away by what these groups, your groups, have been able to achieve in challenging Enfield's local plan. Our experience in trying to protect the marshes in the neighbouring Waltham Forest, I just, you know, by comparison, what you've achieved is really phenomenal. And we did succeed in getting hundreds of comments into the local plan for Waltham Forest, which very similarly were all ignored. And I think one of the most worrying aspects is the housing targets being so arbitrary. And even though in Waltham Forest they massively exceeded the London plan, even at the time, they were allowed to proceed with, you know, even more housing. So they've upped the housing since the inspector basically resolved his objection, which was very, very disappointing. So I guess I have a couple of factual questions. One of them I think has been answered in the chat, so thank you for that. You'll need to look through to see how many submissions were made about white webs. The other one was that in our marshes group we have to challenge the Lee Valley Regional Park Authority quite a lot, and they're meant to act as environmental custodians. But I'd be interested to know if they actually sold off that parcel of land at Ramley Marsh, which will now be developed into housing. And finally, if I could get in touch with you, that would be great. What we have different issues in trying to protect the marshes related to tall buildings, which you touched on but haven't gone into. And it will be brownfield areas that are developed, but they will be on floodplain, so they're still inappropriate. So it'd be really good to get in touch with you and find out more from you. Thank you. So
Carol or Andrew, could you just answer the point about Ramley?
Yeah, I don't know who the owner is of that at the moment. We can probably find out. One of the things that we had a battle with with the council was we asked under FOI for a map of the borough showing the council-owned land, and they refused a number of times to give it to us for various reasons. But in the end, we managed to get it out of them. So we can probably find out if they own that land or not. But if they don't own that land, I'm not sure who it is. But yeah, you can get in touch with us through our website, Caroline.
Caroline, I have Caroline's and your details, so do ask me. That's fine. So no Tamara.
Yes, I'd just like to ask, as someone from the other side of London, in the London Borough of Bromley, is there any way I could help or support you? Is there anyone I could, or department I could write to or email?
Well, at this point, we're past the consultations. There will be hearing statements going in for stage 2. If the inspector decides to proceed to stage 2, that is still a question. And those are the site selections. But again, they're going to be technical representations. So, you know, they're not particularly easy to do.
No.
But if you go onto the Enfield new local plan site, you can sign up for emails, so you'd be notified when the next round comes through. But at this point, we're sort of just waiting to see what happens with the inspector. Nothing particular going on right at this second.
Thank you very much.
I would say tomorrow, I'm going to post this again in the chat, which is that we at CPRE London, we are asking people to write in support of the letter we sent to the Deputy Mayor this morning. So if you have a look at that and then talk in your own words about your part of London and why the Greenbelt there is important to you. So we've got Mark Sullivan and then Tim Root. Mark. Can't hear you, Mark. Shall we go to Tim? Waiting, see if Mark.
Thank you. The council want to build a lot of homes, and they appear they're sufficient. is there any evidence of collusion between the Enfield Council and the developers? In other words, that the council may believe they can't get developers to develop homes on the brownfield sites, and that's why they're aiming for the greenbelt sites, because the developers may have told them that this is where we want to build because we'll be able to make the money we require to build.
The answer is sort of yes and no. There is a problem at the moment with developing any large residential on brownfield sites. It's just the economy at the moment is making the land more valuable for industrial. So it depends on where the money is coming from for those sites. I mean, the capacity remains there and probably will come forward in the next few years. But at the moment, I'm friendly with a brownfield developer, and so he tells me what the state of the play is. As Andrew mentioned, I mean, we have been arguing that Enfield's focus on greenbelt is to make money selling off their greenbelt. The inspector would not let us go there. I mean, 4 or 5 times various of us brought it up, and the KC, just would bat it away, and the inspector just wasn't going to deal with that issue. Corruption, collusion, who knows? We have no proof of it. But just in terms of the borough's finances overall, it would definitely benefit from them from selling off their greenbelt. And they're definitely undercounting brownfield capacity. So we can't make any particular accusations though at this point.
Thanks.
I was just very quickly say that I mean, I'm not wanting to side with the council, but being objective here, there is a very large site on the A10 that people might know, which was a B&Q, a big B&Q warehouse opposite the cinema at Southbury Road. That was earmarked for 1,800 homes in 2020, I think. And the planning application has lapsed because the developer says it's just not viable. So there is some evidence at the moment that brownfield is difficult. But whether we can apply that more generally, I don't know. But that is certainly the council's argument, very clearly.
Just to add to that, I mean, that's the developer I remain friendly with. That particular site is owned by BlackRock, who can't take a long view because they have investors who want returns. The site opposite, where the cinema is at the moment, is owned by a London Royal Trust or something, who don't have investors, so they are prepared to take the long view and do residential there, even under the present economic circumstances. So it's a complicated issue. So.
And I am personally wondering whether why is brownfield development any more or less viable than greenfield development? Because greenfield obviously requires utilities and you have to put all the gas, electric, water, roads, everything, all that infrastructure has to be built in. So I am not understanding why brownfield would be less viable than
I think
greenfield.
It's just that it's more valuable for industrial at the moment.
Yeah, so that's a slightly different issue, isn't it? But if viability is the issue, then I'm not sure why allocating greenfield should be, the answer. So and I think viability for housing relates to the market, doesn't it, as well? And that's where the problem lies. So if you're building a load of homes in the greenbelt, you're still facing that level of viability issue, I would have thought. Mark, we still can't hear you. No, you're on mute. No, can't hear you. Sorry. Do you want to write in the chat and we can read it out for you? Mark, write your question in the chat if you can. Richard, we'll come back to you.
Yes, really, just to follow up on the viability, one of the two things is I was promised in the Laura Act that we would force landowners to register their interest in land, including even if they had an option on the land. However, unfortunately, it didn't appear in the Lura bill, and so we still don't know who owns this land, a lot of it, although obviously with the research that they've done in Enfield, they managed to find out who does own some of it anyway. The big problem, of course, of this is that the viability aspect is that they will have to build a lot of market housing in order to raise the money they need. Otherwise, the land won't be so valuable. As a result, we're going to get market housing in these greenbelt sites, and as low sometimes as 14 per hectare, which is a total and utter waste of the land that's available.
Absolutely, and catastrophic in environmental terms. For London, where we can't afford to pave over more land, we need that land for biodiversity, for habitat, for water management, for its ecosystem services, and to avoid urban sprawl, which is the big problem, of course, for climate, high carbon, car dependent development. So, Mark, how did Enfield Council justify housing numbers? Sorry, how did Enfield Council justify housing numbers above the London plan numbers and still argue for removing land from the Greenbelt? Councils are permitted to do that.
Well, they're trying to argue exceptional circumstances. And their reason for exceptional circumstances is they have a lot of people on the housing list, around 4,000, and then they have the London plan target. Plus, they're arguing that there is a huge need for family homes in Enfield, and they try and argue that you can only build family homes on greenfield sites, not on brownfield sites. That's one of their big arguments. So they're ignoring a lot of things, such as there's nowhere for older people to downsize to free up the family homes that already exist. You can, of course, build family homes anywhere. It doesn't have to be on Greenbelt, but family homes and affordable housing and the housing list are their sort of big arguments. But the fact is, the greenfield sites will not produce affordable housing. The ones that are already going ahead do not, like Trent Park. The affordable housing there, I think you would have had to have a salary of at least 60,000 a year for shared ownership. It's not affordable housing. And there's another one that's gone up on the old Royal Chase Hotel, which was just on the edge of the Greenbelt. Similar thing there, not affordable to key workers or normal people. So there's a lot of arguments which Matt Byrne of Better Homes Enfield has, because he's a statistician, has really analysed the housing need and the housing availability. And he made some really good arguments that made the inspector sit up and take notice.
Thanks, Carol. And sorry, was that Mark? Have you managed to?
Did you hear me then?
Yes, we can now.
Oh, well, it's to do with microphones. Goodness knows it's why it's like that. Sorry. Well, thank you very much for that. The other question I have was, well, Andrew's answered it about how TfL can turn up and make statements about we suggest you build on the Greenbelt, because TfL are presumably responsible for the Mayor of London. I mean, they're
right. Well, they actually
independent
can't.
body, are they?
Yeah, they can't. So their thing was, this was just an example, but out that actually had a consultant to come up with that plan.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry, just let me finish this. But TfL did say in their hearing statement that we haven't taken ecological or heritage factors into consideration with this. It's just an idea. And in fact, the area they're proposing to build on in Trent Park is conservation area and rare acid grassland. So, those things may play in down the road. I don't know.
Well, it's an interesting, just quickly, it's very interesting sort of precursor to this sort of latest version of ideas that ministers thought of building houses around railway stations, which we've been to before, and now Labour's onto it. It's this man, Paul Cheshire, who lives in the LSE, who keeps coming out with it.
Oh, yeah, LSE's
been near a railway station himself.
Yeah.
And on that point, there's an RTPI report from many years ago which shows very clearly that if you build around railway stations, that only deals with a very small proportion of trips, and those trips are usually radially into London or into the nearest town. and they don't, 95% of trips, which will be local trips, for example, will remain in cars. And so if you add in, so to school, to the local amenities, to work, which is not radially into London, all of those trips will continue to be made by, well, new trips will be made by car if you build development in that way.
Yeah,
So
Richard's written a letter in the Sunday Times exactly saying that.
Right, so they're very clear that it's not a sustainable route. So yeah, we would definitely need to challenge that. So we've just got we've just got 3 minutes left. So Andrew, I don't know if you wanted to just add one more last thing there before we wrap up.
Well, I was just going to reiterate for those that haven't seen the chat. I did answer Mark's point. TfL didn't really turn up to make a case for particular building sites. So their argument is that they have to provide the transport into these new placemaking areas, and they're saying that the density is far too low, it'll be far too car dominated to justify investment in new bus routes, which these sites will obviously need. And so that's the reason why they want the 12,000 homes on Chase Park, because at that density, it does make economic sense to provide the bus routes and the investment that comes from that.
So yeah, so then the question is, well, why don't we build the 10,000 homes at Meridian Water first?
Well, that's a very interesting
that
point, because of course National Rail built a new railway station there some years ago, way before even any housing's turned up. So yeah,
exactly.
that's yeah.
So,
and interestingly, just one last Enfield Council story. Vistry is the developer at Meridian Water, and Enfield has just had to pay them £450,000 as a delay fine because they failed to remove a handful of people who were living on barges in an area that was coming up for development by the deadline. And at the same time, Enfield is closing 7 libraries to save £500,000. So go figure.
Anyway, so
moving on.
So Rob Morgan, you've mentioned the London-wide target, so maybe that's a good note to finish on. So you're asking how they've managed to increase from 52,000 to 88,000 a year, and I mean the answer is I don't think any of us can really answer that, because we know that the housing crisis is not about building houses. We can build houses. We could, if we build at 88,000 a year, which is hugely unlikely, given that we've managed to build in London at roughly 38,000 a year for the last 10 years. Even if we built at the 88,000 a year, that isn't going to tackle the issues that are facing London in terms of its housing crisis, which are about tenure and distribution, and most importantly about affordability and the lack of social housing. So I think that we need to get everything in perspective, and those are some issues that we raised in our letter that we sent this morning to Jules Pipe, about how the focus on house building, but most specifically the focus on building on Greenbelt, is a real distraction from the job that is facing London and the country, which is tackling the housing crisis. And if we don't get on top of this, then, as the papers are telling you day after day, London will hemorrhage. It will continue to hemorrhage families, people, and we're not going to be a city that people want to live in anymore, or are able to live in anymore. So I think the problems that we have are a great deal more important than trying to release Greenbelt, and that those are the problems that the politicians now should be really focusing on, and that trying to release Greenbelt is a distraction from those problems. So I'd urge you to have a look at what we've written, and certainly to write yourselves. And and just to thank everybody again, and particularly the amazing work in Enfield. And thank you so much for putting together such an amazing presentation today. We'll close here. We'll make the recording available. And then if everybody could give our speakers a virtual clap, that would be amazing. Or you can turn on your your microphones and give them a proper clap. And yes, that's everything. So thank you so much, and goodbye.
Yeah, thank you.